People who throw cake on paintings.
Oh.
Have you? I was like so pissed off. I just saw that news. I was like, why?
It would be quite difficult for Lakshmi to send that orange cube, the big one behind her, up there. There's got to be the tiny one. Yeah, of course, surely.
Conversation made me also, realize, of course, how vandalism has made space a better art gallery than Earth nowadays.
I have a long story because I actually started work on this series in 1992. So that's about 30 years.
And those who are listening on Spotify and Google Podcasts, please come back to YouTube and watch it.
It's just got me so excited. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the season 2, episode 7 of Smurf House, a podcast where we mainly discuss space stuff, but also end up rambling about a host of other topics from K-pop to NFTs. This is your host Pooja, aka your wandering stargazer, and we have
your host Aleena Joseph, who is a potentially spaced out space person. Yeah.
And I am rejoining after a lot of episodes. So hi to everyone back. Aleena, I hope you missed me.
Of course. I missed you and your jokes and the vibe, everything. I mean, that's what I can tell you right now. But yeah, I mean, it's so nice to have you back on board, Pooja. Yeah, recently, you guys must have heard from the previous podcast and everything that, APOSA had a Cosmic Sandbox Design Thinking workshop, and we were on a break after the workshop as well. And using this opportunity, I would like to thank all of the supporters out there who joined our workshop and also showed support to us. It was a really wonderful time for all of the APOSA team, and a big thank you for everyone from Team APOSA to all of you again. And I'm showing 2 times the hearts today, so that's it. Yes, Pooja.
Yeah. I guess one of the other things that has really intrigued me in space news that I guess a lot of people might have heard of, that Singapore had recently hit a historic milestone where they have launched 2 locally designed artifacts in collaboration with the Nanyang Technological Institute, which is NTU, as a part of their moon gallery on the International Space Station, and it's going to be orbiting the Earth for the next 10 months. Moreover, these have been created using 3D printers, which really intrigues me even more, which is really, really cool. And I think our topic today is related to that, Aleena. Why don't you go ahead and elaborate on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And just imagining about having a space art that is on this International Space Station, and also it is 3D printed. Wow. I mean, that itself is a combination of the 2 best technological fields blended together in a perfect way, right? Like, wow. I mean, literally so much wow. And Space Smurfs is so much excited to introduce to the audience the 2 amazing experts that we have on this podcast today who were involved in this process. The first Singaporean artist in space, Ms. Lakshmi Mohanbabu, an architect from Singapore. And we have Professor Daniel New from the Singapore Center for 3D Printing, who had led the 3D printing process as well. Welcome both of you to this one amazing podcast. Hi.
Good to be here.
Hi. Yeah.
I think not just that, today's podcast, of course, is going to be amazing because we have so many questions, even internally as a team. But if all of you want to interact with both of these amazing artists and creators, please don't miss out the opportunity on Saturday, which is 11 June at 5 p.m. IST on Clubhouse. We will be having a live interaction with them. That's definitely not an opportunity you should miss. And I think before me and Aleena go on our different tangents, without much ado, let the smurfing begin.
Great. Thank you, Pooja, for reminding all our audience about the Clubhouse session, and hope to see you all there. And yeah, I mean, my very first question goes to Lakshmi, actually, and I have a personal inclination to you as well, because I admire art a lot. I am like a huge fan of art, and I would like to know about your journey into the art world. Like every artist's journey into that is different. Like we all have a story. And again, later into the field of space, like how was that transition happening and things like that? Yeah.
Well, actually, art is something I've always done. Like I started drawing as a very, very little child, and I pretty much drew everything I saw. So I mean, I really have no clear idea of what I like more, whether it was figurative or geometric. So it was just everything, and it was really that inclination that led me to, study architecture, which I loved as well. And then I ended up studying design also. So I'm a designer also by qualification. And so art was just something that stayed with me all through. And my background as an architect and a fashion designer has hugely influenced my art, because everything that I do somehow brings some element of architecture or fashion or design into my work. And so that is really what led me into this, this journey, as an artist. And because of my background, I also thought that I would incorporate whatever I did. It would have some element of architecture and design. And I also wanted to create art that had a message, a message to people. And ideally, a very simple message that would resonate with people from all walks of life, like anywhere. And so that's always been my idea. So whatever I create, I have that is the basis of what I'm going to do. And so when I was creating my work, especially the one that's now on the International Space Station, I was thinking that I have to have something that has a message to all of humanity. And that is what really connected me. Someone who was following my art actually introduced me to the Moon Gallery, and that kind of led a series of events, because a lot of the elements that were there in the artwork already had something to do with space, because even architecture is about spaces and the interaction of spaces. And so for me, space in every way, space in terms of interaction, space in terms of interaction with people, so any kind of space. So there already was an element of that in my work. So it sort of fitted in really well with what the Moon Gallery had in mind as well, because it just, it had a message for humanity, which is really simple. And then, so that really was the progression for how I ended up, being an artist that's, who's now ventured into this arena of space.
Wow, I mean, it's such an inspiring what do you call, the pathway that you had. And I totally agree with, the way the art can be, of anything in any sort. And like, and I always have thought about this, like art, even if a 4-year-old draw something, like simply like some flower or some scenery they just draw, I mean, that is also a beautiful art from their perception and from those who like to see it, right? And it's really inspiring to hear from you how that happened, and then you entered into the space sector. And I would like to know more about it. But yeah, we'll move forward to the question for Professor New, actually.
Yeah. Actually, before I move on, I feel like I really relate with your story, because I am from an arts background, and I, work in the space sector per se. And a lot of people come up to me and tell me, how is there a connection, and do you have a connection? I feel like, just like you mentioned, art is so, it's so liquid in a way that it's so fluid that there is a connection, that you can build everywhere and anywhere in that. And it's so relatable as well. So I find your story so beautiful and inspiring. And that actually takes me to the question for Professor New. I was wondering, how did 3D printing get into this whole conversation of creating the art piece? And was there a connecting link, prior connecting link, or how did that, come up in terms of the 3D printing and the space art?
All right. So thanks for inviting me today. So yeah, I mean, the best thing about 3D printing is this ability to print out highly complex components, which traditional manufacturing techniques such as milling, turning, and so on and so forth, are unlikely to fulfill its requirements. So it is especially apt actually for highly complex art actually, such as those produced by Lakshmi, if you think about it, which is the case right here. Now 3D printing within the landscape of Singapore, I'm not too sure about the other countries, but at least for within the landscape of Singapore, 3D printing actually sort of like started up quite a few years ago, with the NTU Singapore Center for 3D Printing. So what happened was that we started this venture to set up this national center to address this need. Actually, it's not even a wish, this kind of thing. It's actually a need to address future manufacturing requirements. If you think about it, right, we're talking about digital manufacturing, moving away from low value-added industries to much higher value-added industries with much higher margins and so on and so forth. For a country like Singapore, 3D printing is the way to go. And if you think about it, it's very, very flexible when it comes down to 3D printing. It can print all sorts of stuff for various industries such as defense, aerospace, biochemical industries, and so on and so forth. I'm quite sure you guys are well aware of the capabilities of 3D printing. And for this particular project with Lakshmi, 3D printing is the best approach that we could thought of. If you have taken a look at Lakshmi's stuff, at the end of the day, we would prefer to use 3D printing to print out something that is far more precise, all right, something that's intricate, all right, than let's say traditional manufacturing. Yep.
I mean, I'm like so excited to hear about 3D printing itself because I've been listening about it for so long on internet and no one exactly, I mean, I haven't seen it in real life, and to hear from an expert like Professor New, it's really interesting, right, Pooja?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
And the way I think Professor New broke it down, it just felt like that was the natural, way forward. And also in terms of the applications, in terms of the clarity that you gave, I think that was very helpful. And I think our audiences will also find that very intriguing in terms of how that is kind of a natural way to go forward. I do know that a lot of engineering colleges or so do try to make use of 3D printers to test out in terms of prototypes, but I had never thought of it to be also in use in terms of art, using it from that point of view. And yeah, so it just opened up a new perspective in my head, so thank you so much for that.
Great. So yeah, I mean, going from there and linking it to, about my small curiosity about 3D printing and for the general audience out there, Professor New, can you please explain what exactly is 3D printing in simpler terms and the application of 3D printing? Why 3D printing will be the global manufacturing era in the future? Like it's going to be that in the future. Why is it so special? What is so special about 3D printing?
Yeah, actually, that's a very, very good question. 3D printing, as the name implies, essentially means that we are printing in 3D space. I'm quite sure you guys are well aware of printing on papers and so on and so forth. Essentially, that's 2D printing. You're printing on a 2D surface. So 3D printing essentially allows us to print layers, all right? Layers upon layers, such that at the end of the day, we're going to get a 3D structure. So if a good way to appreciate and understand 3D printing is to imagine a 3D object in your mind. And can you imagine, right? You just break up this 3D object into many, many thin 2D slices. And the machine, the 3D printer, essentially prints, so as to speak, each layer, all right? With each layer fusing with one another to create this 3D structure. So, I mean, of course, that's not an in-depth explanation, but I believe this will be the explanation that most people will understand. Yeah. Of course, there are many, many different approaches when we talk about 3D printing, and these are, I'm just giving a sort of a layman approach, Anyone who is more interested, I'm sure they'll be able to find plenty of resources on YouTube or perhaps talk to us during the interactive session on the various methods of 3D printing and so on and so forth. Yeah. Because at the end of the day, all right, whichever 3D printing approach that you choose depends largely on the design of the 3D structure that I've got in mind, as well as the material that you are using. All right, you could be using metal printers, right, to print metals. Okay, and perhaps, but then again, if you are trying to print polymers, you have to use something else. So by and large,
I think 3D printing is going to be the future way of manufacturing things, and like I always have this question behind my back when I think about 3D printing, but that I don't know whether it's suitable for this session, but I'm just going to pop it out just in case if anyone wants to have a food for thought. Well, if 3D printing is made wide popular, I think that actually increases the chances of 3D printing something like guns and stuff like that. That's yeah, right. It can happen, and that actually again makes it more vulnerable, considering the situations even now with just we go to the store and we buy the gun, but that's not the case if that's a 3D printing happening, right? Like, wow. Okay. Yeah.
Coming back from that tangent, I think one of the things that I picked up from the conversation is how I think Lakshmi also believed that 3D printing was a natural course for the artwork. I was a little more curious about the artwork itself, the interaction series as we call them. I wanted to know, Lakshmi, what was the thought process behind it, and how did you design it, and how did you choose that this would be the right fit in terms of making it materially? If you could expand on that.
Well, it's kind of a long story because I actually started work on this series in 1992. So that's about 30 years ago.
Wow.
And I was a design student, and it was just something that I was playing around with. And like I said, I was always looking for things that connected people from different parts of the world. And then I realized that and then of course it took me about 25 years to go on adding layers of meaning and to really simplify the idea more than complicating it over the years, was really to filter it down to something that was really simple, that, like you said, even a child could understand, And so all the concepts that are there in it are things that are absolutely basic. So like basic shapes, basic colors, numbers from say 1 to 5, that's all you need to know. And each of these concepts have a connection. So like 1 could relate to a dot, or 2 to 2 sides, and 3 to Trinity, or a triangle, which is a basic building block or the most basic polygon. So things like that, so concepts like that. And then other ideas that connect humanity. So, all of us are, born into this world, we exist for a certain time. So existential ideas of creation and preservation, existence as we know it, and then dissolution where it ends. And then it again starts, so you have this repeating life cycle. So that is, wherever you're from, this is something that you will go through. So, and then the idea of numbers, because to me, I thought of numbers as people, like different races. And I felt like, people will ask me, like, especially when I explain the interaction series, they'll ask me like, why duality and why not singularity? So I have all of that in it. So, people believe in the one God, and then there's someone who believes in a few, so I'm like, for each there is a number, so you can choose 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, on to infinity. And then the idea of infinity, that it exists in all our lives, in every aspect of our life, right, even between 2 numbers. So that is how I connected it. So it's something that I couldn't say that is Asian, or that's Indian, or that's American, because it actually belongs to everyone. So it was an idea that all these concepts within the paintings, they actually started off as paintings. So I created these large paintings. They are about 160 centimeters by 160 centimeters. So they're quite large. Wow. And even when I did the paintings, I actually liked the idea of 3D printing. So I had a huge 3D printed element even in the paintings. So when I created the frames have got plugs that are the exact design of the painting. So if it's a red painting with a certain design, then it's got a red plug, which is 3D printed on the frame. So I already had this very, I have been always fascinated with the idea of 3D printing. And having said that, the final designs of the interaction series, I have a total of only 5 designs. That's it. But these 5 designs, each of them comes in 3 colors. Because I really wanted to suggest the idea that even though you have the same form, you change the color, and you have a different perception of what that form is about. So, and that could be quite cultural. So it could be based on your race or region or whatever, or belief system. So when you see the same form in the color orange, you feel like, oh, that could be Hindu, or if you see it in another color, you think that's Buddhist, another color is Islamic, and so on. So I wanted to express that idea that we're actually seeing the same form, but a change of color, and our own color perception is quite limited as humans. We have a very short color spectrum, or any spectrum, audio spectrum, or So that was the idea that I wanted to highlight, that we have all these differences, and it's really within it's in those differences that we actually have, a common element. And that the fact that you have numbers 1 to infinity, so you really can't argue that 1 is better than 2 or 3, or prime numbers are better than 1. So that was the idea that I wanted to convey. So these 5 designs have literally got the same concepts behind them. So one was the idea that it's based on a concentric shape, that everything starts from a point, literally like our galaxy or the universe starts with a big bang. And ultimately it goes back to a point, to nothing. So it starts with nothing, you have existence, and then it goes to nothing. You have this life cycle that repeats. So those are the ideas, and that is why the cube that worked with Professor New, that also it starts with this concentric, it has a concentric structure where this rotational geometry, you have the same elements revolving around the center. So that's kind of a basic idea of what it's about. And that particular piece is based on a floral form, because when you think of flowers, it exists all over the world, nature. And it's a floral form. So it's like petals radiating out from the center, but they're actually arrows. And then arrows really show direction, movement, progression, movement of time, existence of space and time. So that was the idea of the cube that we worked on.
Wow, I mean, it's smart, it sounds beautiful. I know it looks beautiful, but it also sounds so beautiful behind the thought. And there's so much from just this one conversation that I think there's so much to see. And I can completely understand why it could have taken years, because this is not an overnight thought. This is definitely like one of our Asian curries, which is like a slow cook recipe
Process.
that takes a lot of time to sort of blend in all the flavors. I feel like you've taken so much time and effort in terms of blending in so many different elements. And you're so correct in terms of how it is relatable with humanity, because we are complex human beings in that sense, and you try to bring in each color and flavor in that sense, which is just so beautiful. And I think the rest of the podcast could go on just appreciating that. But
exactly. I mean, I totally resonate with what Pooja just mentioned, that I'm sure it might have been very beautiful in real, but just listening to it, I was just wow, like arrows shooting out from the flower petals, like that itself, it's like I'm like, I don't have much words to explain like what I feel towards it. And again going back with what Pooja mentioned, the inclusivity that you have done regarding to the numbers or the races or the different religions that is there, bringing all the humanity together, and also the different ideas, like wow, I'm just so excited to see. I mean, is there any way that we can actually view this particular piece so far, like any website or link?
I have the piece, I have a larger version of the final product that's behind. And then I have a whole.
I was just wondering, I was going to ask that, because I saw even the white cubes, which was
so the white cubes are all produced at NTU. So there are variations of all the iterations that they did, and they also produced the same size in Inconel. So that's the actual piece,
Oh, wow.
You can see there are 12 arrows that are radiating outwards. So those 12 arrows are like petals, so they're from the positive space and they radiate outward. And then you have 12 arrows that actually converge to the center, which are negative space. So it's an interaction of the negative and the positive space.
The up close image of the smaller piece was so beautiful. And those who are listening on Spotify and Google Podcasts, please come back to YouTube and watch it. You shouldn't miss this opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I am going to, think about a lot of the things we just mentioned, but one of the things that you just started off with being how it's taken you years to develop that concept, also because it's so complex in terms of its meaning, but it's so simple in its output. And even for to have or design something which is so simple and which can convey so much of the meaning that you want to, is a really tough task, because even when you have to like just communicate, I mean, we are in science communication in a space, and even communicating difficult concepts sometimes in simpler forms is challenging, let alone design it and put it in some sort of a, I feel like design is in some ways universal languages, right? Which is showcasing and connecting everyone. So designing something like that, I can only imagine how challenging it could have been, but also rewarding, I think, in some ways. It's just got me so excited. But I am going to move on and ask you one more question which popped in my head while we were discussing. Can you tell us a little more about the Moon Gallery Foundation, and what are they trying to do, especially with the kind of artwork that we put to display and so on and so forth?
Well, the Moon Gallery Foundation is based in the Netherlands, and their idea really was to create, because to send artworks to the moon is not easy, and it costs money, and you can't have huge artworks. So the idea was to have really tiny artworks from all over the world. So small artworks with big ideas. That is really like their idea, small artworks which had a big idea for humanity, and worthwhile enough to be sent to the moon. So that was the basic gist of what they had in mind. So within the format of a tiny gallery that can hold in your hand, literally hold in your hand, you have 100 artworks from all across the globe that have a message for humanity.
That's a brilliant concept. I feel like that's a worthy tagline that we should probably have on TikTok.
Exactly.
Small artwork, big ideas.
Yes,
that's
exactly.
amazing.
It's like the butterfly effect, like the little butterfly flaps, and it can turn into a tornado. But yeah,
absolutely. I feel like I want to congratulate both of you again, because I think you just initiated something which is so beautiful. Again, in terms of connecting art as well as like the humanity angle or humanities in that sense with space. I think getting all the three together in form of like something as physical and something as simple as that in form of an idea is just so beautiful, and I think we need more such initiatives as well, and more people like you to come up and
exactly. Yeah, and my next question is on, like, I think both of you can, Professor New and Lakshmi, can also answer that. Like, how is an art displayed in the space environment different from that is on Earth? Like, what are the things to be considered, like from an artist perspective, and also from the technological perspective that has been used here? In that case, we are using 3D printing. Like, what are the things to consider, and what are the difficulties or challenges that you might have faced in this whole journey? And is it, which is good, like having the art displayed on Earth or having the art displayed on space?
Okay, maybe I can address this first. I mean, from the engineering perspective, from the scientific perspective, I would say that one big consideration is the density of the material or the mass of the cube, or whatever object you choose to set up, right? So because at the end of the day, you have to put all these structures, all these objects into a rocket, or basically on the spaceship. That's going to be like, it has to escape the Earth's gravity and things like that. So you have to make it strong, but yet light. At the end of the day, the strength to weight ratio has got to be high. So this is something that we have got to be mindful of. Surely, right? Lakshmi it would be quite difficult for Lakshmi to send that orange cube, the big one behind her, up there. There's got to be the tiny one. Yeah, of course, surely, the gallery will not be too happy if they choose this big block, right? So yeah, so that's one of the concerns. Another concern is, I suppose it's a happier one, because there's not much oxygen up there in the moon. The last time I checked. So oxidation is not a problem, as you can imagine. Yeah, unlike Earth, right, we have oxidization, we have depending on what kind of material you use.
And also people who throw cake on paintings.
Yeah.
Have you, I mean, I was like so pissed off. I just saw that news. I was like, why? And the reason was they had to save Earth. I'm like, okay. But
Yeah, that's one thing. Yeah, I mean, there's hardly anyone up there, isn't it? If you think about it, right?
yeah.
Yeah, and yeah. So the quite a few considerations, but yeah, I'll hand over to Lakshmi. Maybe Lakshmi would like to share with us, what some of the, who knows, how like sending this stuff to the moon actually affect your artistic interpretation and things like that. Yeah, I'll let the artist address that question.
Yeah.
So yeah, like you said, there's no vandalism up there on the moon. So so that's it. Plus, So yes, that is definitely a plus point. That once it's there, it's there. Yeah. And of course, we actually created a number of prototypes. Because and of course, Professor New said that you could use pretty much any kind of metal, and of course, they suggested Inconel, but we ended up with aluminium because it was really the lightest material, and I also got the color I wanted, which is orange. And so your other question was
like the challenges that you have faced when it came to being from the artistic perspective on creating this artwork.
Well, I thought it was a great opportunity to get this technology element, or have people who really knew what they do, and to blend art and technology. I found it extremely fascinating, and it's something that I'm looking to continue working with Professor New in the future. So yeah, because it just got me really fascinated. So in fact, one of the things I'm doing is that, like I said, we have I have only 5 designs. And each of these 5 designs have got, again, very basic, simple ideas in them. One is about energy, one is based on spiral, so it's really about our DNA and our galaxy, which is also a spiral shape. So each one has got a very simple idea in it. And because it connects people from all over the world, I actually want to have, I had this in mind that it should be in all parts of the world, in every city. So it gets conversations, it gets people to start talking about it. And I also wanted to have something connected with technology, a technology element in it. So so we're starting with Singapore as phase 1. We start with these huge mega cubes in different parts of Singapore, and ultimately in different cities in different parts of the world. So what happens is that you have this connection where these cubes connect humanity literally and physically to all parts of the world, and then ultimately to space as well, because on the International Space Station, what is interesting about the International Space Station is that it orbits Earth 15.5 times a day. Yeah. It travels at this crazy speed of almost 22 times the speed of sound. So it covers all of habitable Earth. So it literally flies over every city. And so my idea was that you have this connection where these 5 artworks have actually, these 5 designs have literally flown over every city. And they will also have a real physical presence in every city. So presently, because it's on the International Space Station, like sitting here in Singapore, I can actually track it on a website, on a NASA website. And it'll tell me that, between 7 and 7:10 p.m., it's going to be flying over Singapore. And I can look up at the sky and see it, because it is the 3rd brightest object in the sky. You have the sun, you have the moon, and then the 3rd brightest is the International Space Station. So you literally know that your artwork is flying over your city, overhead. So this is pretty much a rather unusual situation, because and at the end of the day, it's also going to be connected to our only natural satellite. So that was the idea, and we are right now looking at doing the very first thing.
Yeah, I think Pooja here, the co-host, my co-host, she's also a stargazer actually. And next time when you see the ISS, you will be like, oh, Lakshmi's artwork is there. Hi. You can, we can even see it through naked eye, right? Like, you don't need a telescope itself to see it, like, because it's the brightest thing. And even if I see it from here, I'll be like, oh, I know the person who created the art that is there in ISS. I know her. So yeah, it's really good, right?
I am planning to photograph a transit of the International Space Station over the moon or the sun pretty soon, which is going to be occurring over Mumbai. But yeah, now that I will, if I do manage to capture it, I am going to remember the exhibit and mention that in my post, definitely. In fact, I think the conversation made me also, realize, of course, how vandalism has made space a better art gallery than Earth nowadays. Taking that concept further, I think we should have more artists, and like Lakshmi said, we will perhaps have more artwork up in space. This question is for you, Professor New. From an engineering standpoint, how do we create spaces, or like how do we create exhibits that would be able to manage or bear the wear and tear in terms of space? What would be the material implications on the particular exhibits? Because space station is of course one angle of it, but in the future, if we want to have an exhibition, say on top of the moon, or take it as a travel to Mars, what do you think would be the limitations or repercussions, or what do we need to keep in mind when designing that? Yeah.
Well, that's a very, very interesting question. And I suppose we need to peer into the crystal ball, right? And look really far into the future. Of course, in the immediate future, surely we have got the technology to print complex 3D art pieces using current technology and things like that. But as I mentioned earlier on, at the end of the day, much of the limitations actually lies in just how much mass we are able to lift up from Earth and towards the moon, or who knows, right? Mars, for all we know. So I'm just speculating up there. All right. So maybe let me just zone up for a while, But perhaps, instead of pre-3D print these materials, these art pieces, and therefore, and it's before launch on Earth, and therefore limiting their size and mass. I'm just wondering out loud here. How about we actually have a 3D printer on the moon and using the moon dust as the basic building material? If you think about it, I'm quite it's not as easy as I made out to be. But what I'm trying to say, if you were to think big, can you imagine? Let's say we have a dedicated 3D printer that's launched all the way from Earth to moon, let's say, and then we have astronauts assembling it, getting it to moon. And can you imagine? We just take a scoop and scoop the moon dust, right, into the material bin, and let the machine, does its thing. Lakshmi could have provided us with the next generation art pieces, and the machine just automates the fabrication. And you know what I'm trying to say? Of course, I'm not saying that it's easy, but perhaps that's sort of like a grand challenge that sort of like putting out there, right? Yeah, so I would say that that to me is one of the engineering challenges, and we can easily extend this, beyond 3D printed art pieces. If you think about it, let's talk about concrete printing. If you think about it, to build basic structures. Okay, imagine building the moon, building houses on the moon, just by using the moon dust, and that's it. We've got whatever material that we have got done. And we're not going to waste fuel, carrying all this stuff up there, be it to the moon or ISS or Mars, things like that. Using the materials that we have got there, and be really organic with the place, isn't it? That we're at, So that's how I look at it. Yeah.
That's really, really mind-blowing. I would say thank you for making us wear our thinking hat for a bit, because I would never have thought about using moon and like moon dust to create artwork, but that does make sense, when the way you explained it. And I don't know about in other places, but if we do manage something like that, I think, Professor New, all those artifacts would be selling at the price of gold on Earth. That is for sure.
I mean, before that, we will have to spend a lot of money on the 3D printing, like sending it to there itself, like, because I almost all this podcast, where we have talked about technology, I always mention it is a given that space-based technologies are way too expensive. It is a given. It is worth what we get from the services that we get from them, but to start it, it's way expensive. And if it happens, it will be really, really amazing. Like Pooja mentioned right now, it's going to be great, and the products will be sold out here. I think it's going to the bigger people, the big elephants in the room, but it will be very, I think Wow. Okay, I'm imagining things for Space Smurfs already. Okay.
Going in a Space Smurf wish list, I think. I think every time we talk about something so new and interesting, it just kind of blows our mind in a certain way that we start jumping and going over tangents.
I'm making sure Aleena does it in a crazy way. That's the thing. Yeah. And going to the next question for Professor New again, like, how is 3D printing an artwork different from the mechanical components or the structures that are usually made? Like Pooja earlier mentioned that 3D printing was commonly used for making prototypes when it comes to the engineering field. So here we are using 3D printing for an artwork. It is going to have a lot of minute details itself. So what was the difference in it, and how was that journey in creating an artwork through 3D printing?
Again, a very excellent question, I'd say. Because, there are people who say that, look, you're just printing an art piece or you're just printing an engineering prototype, just how difficult it is. 3D printing, 3D printers are doing just the work all for you. But I beg to differ. Because at the end of the day, we have to ensure that the designs are adequate. The designs are able to withstand the stresses of its intended purpose or applications. All right, or else there's no point in printing them out for usage anyway. So typically speaking, all right, all 3D printed parts will have to come from, they all have to start from a 3D drawing or 3D CAD drawing. Right? So, whoever is trying to print something, be it for art or for engineering prototyping, he or she will have to come up with the designs first. And, right, chances are, right, we will have to do what we call finite element analysis. So basically, we basically, sort of like input the stresses that we expected to be exerted upon the prototype, or be like the stresses, the strain, the forces, and whatsoever, anything that affects the structural integrity of the object that we wanted to print out. And after the FEA process has been done, we have to make sure that there are no so-called obvious weak points that we can see. If there are obvious weak points, if there are areas of improvements, clearly we have to change the design again, and then rerun the FEA analysis and so on and so forth until we're happy with the design before we get stuff printed out. So I suppose for art pieces, we do have an easier time because we're assuming that no one throws cake at our art pieces. Okay, so it's going to be static then. All right, no one's supposed to really touch it and things like that, And typically, FEA analysis will probably not be necessary for small little art pieces, but for giant art pieces or large scale ones, right? Probably we still have to do it. But of course, you're talking about moon, let's say, whereby the gravity is actually 1/6 that of Earth, thereabouts. So, it's not too bad. It's not too bad. Gravity is not a serious concern. You probably have time to catch the falling object, actually.
Yeah.
If you ever fall something.
Yeah, it will be like in slow motion, like it starts to fall. I mean, if it falls down, you'll be like slow motion. You'll try to catch it and then you'll catch it. Wow. Nice.
Yeah. It's a bit like one of those slow motion kung fu movies, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. I was thinking of Bond movies actually, like where the slow motion scene happens, he just slides in and get the thing before it falls down. Like.
Yeah. So depending on the exact usages, different considerations will have to thought through. Before we say that, look, we have to analyze for this particular type of stressors or this particular type of factor, and this and that. And also for engineering prototypes, depends. It really depends on the nature and the intended purposes, because sometimes there's no need to achieve a very smooth surface, let's say. Unlike Lakshmi's artwork, which demands nice gleaming surfaces because it needs to have aesthetic appeal. Whereas for engineering prototyping, much of the time, I would say that surface finishing is something that if it's good enough, it's good enough. We can always do some post-processing, all right? So which places less demand during the printing stage, sometimes. So, whereas for art is totally different. it has to impress people. It has to give people this wow factor. So surface finishing has got to be top notch wherever possible. And during prototypes, it's the stress, the ability of the component to handle the stresses, forces, that is of are most important rather than surface finishing. Most of the time.
Yeah, that was a very insightful answer of like how 3D printing is different from having it from the technological perspectives like engineering and things, and when it comes to like 3D printing for an artwork. That was really interesting to hear, right, Pooja?
Absolutely. In fact, I think every time I'm hearing them say something, it's giving me more food for thought. Like silent notes, mental notes are happening. Oh, need to think this more. Need to read more on this. In fact, my next question, which I have for Lakshmi, is somewhere on the lines of thinking loud. As an architect, if you were given the opportunity to design something on the moon, for example, in terms of a structure. And I don't see that, that's not possible. Maybe not immediately, but definitely sometime in the future.
Elon Musk is there. I mean, Elon Musk is there. He will definitely bring structures, living structures.
For sure, right? So, if you had to build something, from an architect point of view, in an environment which is very different from the one that we are used to building in, what do you think would be your main pointers, or what do you think would be important to sort of consider while designing something in terms of structures when it comes to some places like the moon or Mars, in terms of living spaces? Yeah, that is something I just wanted to ask.
Yeah, I feel like at the end of the day, it's really like, when you're designing something, whether it's a building or it's a product, it's really like the customer needs. And then you have a whole lot of challenges. So even on Earth, you'll have a whole lot of challenges, which would be this, the shape and size of your plot, weather elements, wind, sunlight, all of those considerations. And it's not going to be, you'll have a different set of challenges when you're building something on the moon or on Mars, for instance. Much lower gravity, not much atmosphere. So of course you would have to have a space that is completely sealed off. And you would also have to have, like, when you enter that space, which is like, whether you're entering a spacecraft or you're entering the ISS, you'll have to have a section which is sealed off. So you enter that space and then that gets pressurized and, you have enough oxygen and then you enter. So you'll always have to have that where in a way, you really cannot have a life outside of that built environment. So you would have to have a concealed space which completely blocks off your environment, which is not the case on Earth. And of course, then you have other considerations like on the moon, you're talking about the regolith on the moon, which could be very abrasive. Yeah. So of course, the best use, like Professor New said, would be to use it as a building material. But you cannot actually go out, like even astronauts who walk on the moon, they're faced with this the reality of their space suits literally getting torn off by the regolith because it's that abrasive. Yeah. So of course, I think it would be very challenging and very interesting to build something there, because you'll have to completely rethink the way you would think of building on Earth, because that you have a sealed environment which cannot be open to the elements. And a challenge is always a challenge. So that is how in fact, even when I was working with, on this, like Professor New was saying that to create an artwork is different. I actually had to, from my part, like I knew that they were going to do a great job. And, but from my side, I knew that I had to completely change the shape and the dimensions of my painting, because when I did the painting, I did not really think that I was going to create an artwork that's going to be sent to the moon. So so the challenge was that the proportions were not amenable for, reducing it in scale. So when I reduced it to something that was only a centimeter cube, a lot of elements would have just broken off. I couldn't have 3D printed it. So I had to completely rework the proportions of the piece so that I knew that it could be 3D printed, where I didn't have extremely thin elements, which I would have had if I had followed the exact shape of my painting. So for me, a challenge is always a challenge. And yeah, I would absolutely love to do something like that.
You're smiling. I think you're one of the one of the kind of people who would, jump on to new challenges. And I guess both of you seem the kind of people who are excited by challenges, and I think that's so infectious as well. I'm completely fascinated by everything that you all have said. Aleena, do you have something else that?
Yeah. I was thinking, like, I totally resonate with what Lakshmi was saying about, when it comes to the structures that will be developed in Moon and Mars, there might be a lot of things that needs to be considered along with the challenges that might come in, like, because that's not something that we are used to do, right? And then I was thinking, like, what kind of a person I am when it comes to challenges. And I feel like I think a lot before taking up a challenge. I waste a lot of time on that. And then I don't know, I might do it or not do it, but yeah, that's the thing. And we'll move on to the last part of this podcast, where there is a last question, which is a little technical for me, actually, and it's to Professor New. Professor, can you describe the prototyping process, and what are some of the resulting different prototypes when it comes to 3D printing?
Okay, so during the process of working with Lakshmi, in 3D printing the various prototypes for the final part, right? I think we basically try all sorts of 3D printing approaches as well as materials. So we start off with Inconel and stainless steel. Okay, so basically we're talking about metal printing. And metal printing has got tremendous challenges, because metal printing, if you think about it, we're essentially sort of like fusing metal powder using high power lasers, according to the design, isn't it? So depending on the material, the surface finishing can be good or not so good. If it's not so good, then we have to make use of various post-processing to make sure that we're going to get nice and shiny surfaces, or a pretty shiny thing, right? And so as to speak. Yeah. So other than using metal printing, which actually we learn a lot, because if you take a closer look at Lakshmi's interaction cube design, you realize that the grooves are actually very, very tiny. And if you think about it, during 3D printing, we are fusing metallic powder. Okay, and there's always of course, they have been 3D printed under very, very tightly controlled conditions. But at the end of the day, since we are using very advanced techniques, there's always a little bit of printing uncertainty, if you catch my drift. And sometimes these grooves, they may not that well. So that took us quite a while to optimize it and so on and so forth. But then again, right, we actually went during the project. We actually went beyond just fabricating the stuff that Lakshmi did, because during this 3D printing process, I think we tried out other materials such as nylon, which is fairly common. And if you think about it, other than 3D printing the actual parts that Lakshmi wanted at the end of the day, if you think about it, this is actually a good opportunity to educate people. So additional cubes, right, are printed using nylon, using other material, aluminum, and things like that. So basically, all this, I think we all try all sorts of designs, so I think we actually learn a lot. Okay, because if you think about it, engineering prototyping using 3D printing is very different from coming up with an artistic piece, which has got designs which actually don't follow engineering acumen. If you think about it, right? Engineers are more used to like small features, predefined rocks and things like that. We just don't have the artistic streak in us. Pardon me for saying that. At least for me. So it was quite interesting. So I think we at least for me, I've learned a lot. The engineers involved, I have to thank them, because they are the ones who actually, program the 3D printers and come up with stuff. And if not for them, to be honest, things wouldn't be as successful as they turned to be. Yeah.
I mean, we also learned a lot today with this podcast about like space art and 3D printing, and how 3D printing is going to be the next big thing in the manufacturing domain, and how space art is going to boom in, and also like how it's been done in the current situation, and that art will not be destroyed in space, and we should always promote space artists. There will be no one throwing cakes on art in space, definitely. So a lot of things I think both of us learned, and also I believe the audience and our viewers might have learned a lot of things today, right, Pooja?
Absolutely. In fact, to sum it up, I feel like it has been interactive, just like Lakshmi's series, and it has been intellectual. It has been a lot of fun, and there has been so much new that I think we've absorbed and learned today. And there will be a lot, I think, over the period of time while we continue our interaction, especially in the next week when we have the live interaction. I think there'll be a lot more that we will benefit as well, which I'm sure a lot of other people will join us for.
Yeah, absolutely. And to all the listeners out there, feel free to join the interactive session happening on June 11th on Clubhouse. And you can ask your doubts and your questions or your thoughts on space art using 3D printing to both Lakshmi and Professor New. They both will be there. Join us for the interactive session. And till then, be safe. Keep smurfing. This is your host, Aleena.
And this is your host, Pooja, signing off.
Signing out. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you very much.